I'm the author of the Christian Life Trilogy, and right now there's groups that are going through the Crucified Life, which is the first in the series. It's a small group program that's designed for Lent. And it works through the 7 last words of Jesus, and there's 7 weeks. And I know at Charlene and David's church, they're launching the Crucified Life series for Lent. And so some of the things that I'll be bringing up that are unique to that particular curriculum will be very applicable to them. And not all small group curriculum is the same, so they don't always have the same components to that we have in ours. But you can just select and pick what you can get out of it. So that's who I am. I'm also a priest at St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Lake Mary, Florida, and been the rector of that church for 15 years. And then Theresa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Theresa. I support Father Charlie through the sales and marketing efforts, if you will, and just in general support of a church that is going to be using or is interested in using the Christian Life Trilogy as part of their small group curriculum, and also provide a lot of support around small group development and tips and best practices around small group ministry as well. So I kind of jumped in with both feet several years back, lead and have led many small groups, and currently am leading 3. They look a little different. Each group looks a little different, but absolutely believe in small groups, what it does for the personal relationship with Christ, just furthering our faith, and then what it does for the church. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. And Theresa's a member of North Point Church, who is a very large church in the Atlanta area, pastored by Andy Stanley's the main guy, right?
Right. We're like this. No. Yes, Andy Stanley is the senior pastor over North Point Ministries, and we have sister churches all over the country, actually all over the world, that have kind of modeled their churches. Went on a mission trip and worked with a church in El Salvador that had gone from a traditional model to more modeled after North Point Ministries and the Andy Stanley churches, and it was really incredible to watch their growth and kind of witness their growth through that. So yeah, it's great. It's great.
That's a very fun, dynamic church.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we encourage, and I'll just dig into some material here. I personally am of the conviction that the best small groups are the ones in which the small group host or facilitator, I use the term host because I think that's really the best spiritual gift that a small group leader should have, is hospitality. And I want to encourage people to use that gift of hospitality and to use their greatest asset, their home, to put in the service of the kingdom and sharing the faith and sharing the gospel. So I think, if we can identify the host first, then second, encourage the host to recruit people that they would like to do life together with and be in Christian relationships with. And so I use an exercise that has the 5, it's called the 5 circle exercise. And it's very useful for encouraging a new host on how to build their group. And it uses 5 F's: friends, family, fellowship, fun, and firm, meaning your work. But we all have these different spheres or circles in our life. Some are more developed than others in various people. You may be retired, so you may not be actively at a firm right now, or you may not have a big social life or something like that, or your family's small, or they live out of town. But we all generally have these 5 circles of people in our life. And I encourage hosts, and one of the things that we do is a host rally at our church where we invite all the people that are going to be hosting a group to come and get just a little bit of training. And I use this exercise where there's the 5 F's, and I have lines underneath each circle, and they I encourage them to write some names of people that may just come to their mind right away, people that the Lord would put on their heart even now, and begin to pray about that and ask some of these people. And it's surprising that we can generate a lot of times a list of 15 or 20 people really quite quickly of that we would love to be in a group with. And basically, I'm under the conviction that everybody already has a small group, and it's just a matter of bringing that group together and giving them something intentional to do. And when you do that, it's often a great small group. It's people that want to be together. They already have existing relationships, and they have some connection. Now, there are other ways to form small groups: sign up lists after church, online registrations to groups. Pastors sort of trying to discern or plug in. But this, to me, are the best groups, the ones that stick, the ones that have a sort of a natural evangelistic component to it, where it's amazing that people will invite people that I would never think would be interested in our church or interested in discipleship. It's also a way for people to invite their spouses and people that maybe don't go to church that are members of their family, and it becomes a tool of evangelism in that respect. Any thoughts about that, Theresa, or questions?
Well, I think you could add another F.
What's
Facebook.
that?
Your Facebook.
That's right.
That's a little bit different, as you know. The model that North Point works under and the groups that I have hosted have been more established through group links or connection events. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, many times whoever, like maybe there's only 5 or 6 people that come together through a connection event, and then we will, because we maybe want to have a little bit, maybe 11 or 12 people, because you have attrition, people fall off, and but maybe if we want to be a little bigger, we brought family, friends, just having people invite certain people once we have the nucleus. And you're right, it's creates a lot of stickiness to the group. Yes. Yeah,
people have to have a way to kind of break the ice and get into relationship with each other. And sometimes it's really hard for people to just show up at somebody's house that they've never been to before with a person they don't even know. And some people are really brave in that way, and others are that takes a tremendous amount of bravery to do that. And if they can just build some kind of, if there's some existing connection, that's very helpful. So for new hosts, I like, when I recruit people whenever we do a small group study in the life of our church, I always put out an invitation to the congregation, encouraging them to be hosts of small groups. And I pretty much think that just about anybody can do it if they're going to invite their friends. And that doesn't mean I'd necessarily put somebody in a group of just anybody. But when somebody goes out and builds their own group, that's usually a group that's going to work. So in terms of any more questions or thoughts about that, I'm going to move on to some things to talk about with respect to preparing for a group. No? Okay. So a couple of things when a person is taking on the task of hosting a small group, I always encourage them to do a little bit of preparation before the group gets started. And as just a minimal preparation, you'll want to get familiar with the particular session that your group is going to be studying. So in our case, with the Crucified Life small group study, there's a discussion guide, and the small group host will want to look through those questions, read the discussion guide over, and make sure they're at least familiar with what's in the text of those discussion guides. And then there's also a DVD video that's part of the our particular small group study, and that's the case with a lot of studies where there's the teaching is done on a DVD video. So they're going to just want to make sure that works for one, and that they know how to work their DVD player, and that all that's been done, the technical side of it, but also just to preview it and look through it. And one of the things that we've put on our study is something called a leadership lifter. And in the DVD menu, you'll see it'll say, leaders watch this first. And then there's actually a little leadership lifter that goes with each session. And what that is on-the-job training for small group hosts that teaches them just a little bit of skills of group dynamics and how to ask questions. It addresses things like prayer for the first time, leading prayer, what to do when you have a talkative person, encouragement to share the load of the small group, to rotate tasks and duties. So it's got all kinds of little tips and things. Many of the things that we're actually covering today are in those leadership lifters. Not all small group hosts, it's been my experience just in my own church, will take the time to watch that. But if they do, that can give them some on-the-job training. And I would encourage them to do that. And in our curriculum, and as with a lot of them, they might have a section, and ours has it in the back, small group basics. And just to look through there, leading a group for the first time, and it goes through different points of things to be thinking about with respect to hosting a small group. So the materials themselves, it's good to let your hosts and leaders know that the materials themselves have a lot of tips and encouragement and things to help them to have a successful small group. So point them to do some of that preparation ahead of time and preview and read through some of those things. I think the biggest thing that you can do, and the most important thing, is to spend some time praying for your group. And the prayer piece of preparation begins actually when you're praying about those 5 circles and praying about who should be in your group, and ask the Lord to lead you to the right people to be in your group. But we also, sometimes when we start something new, we get anxious about things. And Theresa, you want to read this verse? Can you see that one?
I think I know this one by him. Okay, but I'll read it verbatim. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Yeah.
Have you in your leading small groups, you ever been anxious about them when they get started, or?
Yes, I have been, and it's for me, it's not the actual taking a group. It's not having people into my home. Because for some reason I'm just wired a little differently. It's like, come one, come all. Make yourself at home. I'll leave the key out. The light's always on. Whatever. But it's more about I get anxious about the people, the individual people, and I tend to want to connect with each person in the group. Anyway, I want to serve each individual person, and sometimes that creates anxiety for me because it doesn't happen overnight. Some people are more reserved, so I've come to realize that I have to just slow my roll when it comes to that it will actually unfold like it's supposed to. Just trusting God for the group.
Yeah. So you're when you get anxious, your concerns are more for that the people will connect, that they'll get out of the group what they're supposed to get out.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's I don't. I'll let y'all, Charlene and David, maybe you have some experience with that kind of anxiety, or maybe some others what are some other anxieties, or do you relate to that one? Or Elvira?
Well, I was just going to say that, this is Charlene. I was just going to say that drawing out the people who seem the most hesitant to share is always something that I'm concerned with, so that they feel safe and heard and have time, even though they might, their thoughts might come a little slower.
Mm-hmm. What are some strategies that y'all use to overcome that?
Well, I generally ask the person who's the most gregarious in the group and talks the quickest to just kind of take a breath and give somebody else a chance to answer.
Okay.
Hopefully without offending them.
Yeah. One thing I know a lot of people get a little nervous about is, what if nobody talks? You know, what if we have all these people in my home and nobody has anything to say, and it's kind of an uncomfortable silence. How do I handle that?
Mm-hmm.
That's when we start singing.
Trust.
I've had very, very, very few silent groups.
Yep, we have found that once you get past that first night, if you can hang in there for the first night, a lot of times the group is off and running after that.
That's right.
Sometimes that first one can be a little awkward, though.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for me, I make it a point, because I do want each person to be touched, and it's about each individual person for me. So I will try to reach out to them either via email throughout the week, or if I have a particularly reserved person, maybe someone that's just has a lot of questions, maybe they either have a lot of questions or they're not talking at all, I'll maybe schedule a coffee with them, just outside of the group, to get to know them just a little bit more, and just to, just coach and talk about what small group has meant. And that goes a long way.
Yep.
Just a coffee date.
Absolutely. And I think that actually, one of the things that we did as a support for our small group hosts at our church as we went through the campaign is we actually assigned a prayer person to all of the hosts and checked in with them before their first meeting and made sure that they were sort of prayed up, and that if there were worries or concerns, that those things could be taken to the Lord, because He's the one that will give us that peace. But we have to come to Him with our petitions and our thanksgivings in order to receive that promise. But I think it's absolutely critical that we pray before the meetings, before people arrive. Pray for the hearts of our group members. Pray for group dynamics. But also, just by doing that act of praying for the group, for the people by name, you actually begin to develop a love for those people and a heart for them, and a heart to see the Lord work in their lives, which is so important for us to have the right spirit towards the people that are in our small groups if you're going to host a group. And I know in our family, sometimes the discussion before a small group meeting is, I can't believe we're going to have these people in our home again. Sometimes we don't have the right spirit. And that can be very human thing to have happen, is that you kind of lose your heart for the group as a host sometimes. Not at first, but after you've done it for a while. And sometimes you've just had a really busy week and you would love to have a night off, but you have your group meeting, and so praying is one of those ways to help overcome some of our emotional things that we got going on in our life.
Yes.
Any other thoughts about preparation for a group? Maybe some things that y'all would think would be important.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Question. Our priest just retired after 2 years of turmoil, and we have now an interim priest, and we're looking for the final one. And I was wondering, how can I present this to the vestry? How can I buy and support? Of course, I'll pray and I'll ask for help to find the right words. But how can I get buy-in for starting a hospitality ministry of having people host? That hasn't been done in my church before.
Sure. It's a great question. I think what I would say just briefly, it's a little bit off topic of what we're talking about today, but I think the key thing would be for me is if I were in your position, is one, you yourself can start a small group. I mean, you have the ability to have people into your home and invite your friends and family and coworkers. So that's one right there that you yourself can do.
Yeah, that's right.
And then if you want, go ask for a hearing from your governing board of your church, the vestry, and say to them, I'd love to share a vision with you. I'm willing to put my time in to be a host of a small group, and I'd love to have others. I'd love to have the opportunity to maybe invite some other people to do this study with me. And having 3 or 4 small groups going at a congregation can be very strong. It's amazing the kind of life change. So it doesn't, you and a few friends could capture a vision and start a ministry, and you'd be off and running. And it doesn't even really take. We have small groups that meet at our church that are not sort of officially started by the church.
Okay.
And sometimes those are better groups, to be frankly with you. Sometimes they can become not helpful groups in the life of a church, but ones that basically are lay-led, have a life of their own, that the priest doesn't have to put energy into to keep it going. I personally love that.
Okay, great. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. The biblical precedent for that, of course, is Acts.
Yeah.
That's exactly the way they did it. They went to the synagogue and then they were in their homes. So it's in presenting it to a clergy or pastor or anything, you'd probably do well to use that scripture as your example.
Exactly. Yeah. That's Acts 2:42, where they continue to meet in the temple courts, and they broke bread and fellowshiped in their homes and shared meals together, prayers, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. Mm-hmm. And the other piece is, there's a neat part of that passage in that section. The Lord added to their number daily those who are being saved. It's that dynamic of the large church gathering coupled with small group ministry and gatherings that creates that interpersonal relationships, and then the energy of the large gathering, and it is what leads people to the faith. I mean, that's the way evangelism and discipleship works. Great point, Shirley.
Thank you.
So just do it. Can't go wrong with being faithful. One of the things that I think is really important to emphasize when you're hosting a small group is you don't want to be a teacher, but you want to be a facilitator. I've often heard it, or even a referee, or a different model. But if people perceive that in the context of your group that the reason why you called the group together is so that you can teach them, that will likely not go over well unless you're some kind of master teacher, that in which case it's less of a small group and more of a classroom. Mm-hmm. And so people come to small groups because they want to build relationships, and they want to have discussion and learn together. And so what I think is the genius of our time is the use of video, so you can actually bring expert teaching into the context of a home, and you don't have to have a teacher in every home to share some kind of lesson. That can be done through video. And then what you really need is somebody to just facilitate the discussion. And I've found that in our experience, sometimes the facilitator is not necessarily the person that hosts the small group, that there can actually be a pairing up of two people, one who has more of a gift of facilitating discussions and another one that's got the gift of hospitality. And that's a winning team to be in a small group. What are some thoughts on that, Theresa?
Yes, I do have thoughts on that. It's absolutely true that, as a host, it is intimidating to think that you have to be a teacher or you have to be knowledgeable in all things. So that's the one thing. And then as a participant, like you said, Charlie, you're wanting to come in and have community. So that kind of goes counterintuitive to student teacher, right?
Absolutely.
I do everything I can to facilitate or allow other people to facilitate. And if it gets quiet, we have radio silence, right? Then I find myself going into that teaching mode, and I actually have to pull myself back and really ask those more open-end questions and go to the more probing questions. And what do you think? And have you experienced this? And do you know anyone that's experienced this? To try to get open conversation started. So it is kind of easy to kind of get drawn into that teacher mode when certain circumstances happen. But it's important to remember that we're facilitators and not teachers as a host.
Absolutely. And I think one dynamic that can sometimes happen is that if you do start becoming a teacher, then everybody actually can sometimes just look to you to give the answer. Mm-hmm. And so, I've seen it in small group discussions where somebody, starts the question, people give their ideas, and then the facilitator turns around and, quote, gives the right answer. And that's not a helpful way of guiding a discussion. Mm-hmm. It's often best to let others have the last word, and to let unanswered questions maybe hang out there sometimes. We don't have to teach the entire Nicene Creed every time we answer a question, or all of the catechism, or whatever our teaching is. We can let some things be unanswered, because those unanswered questions sometimes drive us deeper individually to seek and to search more and to come up with some things on our own in terms of adult learning. Mm-hmm. I always try to encourage everybody to get a chance to talk. Sometimes people can dominate conversations in small group settings where they do tend to talk too much. One of the strategies that I use to get people talking is to recognize that there's two types of people, thinkers and feelers. And so I might start with the question that's in the study guide, and somebody may give an answer that's maybe the one that keeps giving all the answers. And you could say, thanks, Brian, that was a great ideas about that. What do some other people think? What do some other people feel about that? And if you ask just that question, Brian said this, what do you think about it? And throw it back out to the group, you'll pick up some of those thinker types with a thinking kind of question. And if you tag feelings on it, you'll hit the feeling type of people. And, how do you feel about that? And it's funny how those two words, think and feel, can pretty much get just about everybody engaged because people pretty much divide up into those two types of people. Mm-hmm. Other thoughts on facilitating a discussion or questions about that? One thing is being comfortable with silence.
Well, what do you think about that, Charlie?
I have the same problem you do, Theresa. I'm more of a teacher, so I don't like silence. Very good.
I will say one thing, just as very short story, but I have had a a lady in one of the groups, and she really did not talk much. But over the course of the year, what we found is that when she did say something, it was pretty profound. So if she was like E.F. Hutton, she didn't speak much, no matter how many times I said, what do you think? How do you feel? What's going on? But when she did speak, we were all like, so there you go. That's the positive. There is that one that keeps silent, beware, because they probably have an amazing something to share, though be it infrequently.
Yeah. That's a good segue, actually, into a story I have that leads us to the next thing about praying together as a group. This is one of those other areas that you may want to think about as a host, and also if you're training hosts, to just address how to lead this. This is one of those places where there can be some anxiety, and just some tips can be helpful. But we had a person in our group who never said anything during the group discussion time. But when we came to the end and asked for prayer requests, that's when they opened up. And it was that sort of ministry time at the end that was the most significant and meaningful. And it's not that they weren't engaged or paying attention. They were absolutely paying attention the whole time. It's just they really needed from our group prayer. And so that's when they started speaking and opening up, is when we did start including more of a prayer request time in our small group that one time. So I think, and one of the things about the Crucified Life study in particular is you want to encourage the groups to get to the last questions in the study guide, even if they have to skip some other ones to get there. There are a lot of questions in our curriculum, and the thing about it is there's more questions there than what a group can do, and so it's important for the facilitator to kind of pick and choose. Some groups, they can get hung up on just doing 3 or 4 questions a night, and that's okay. But the one that you do want to work towards at the end is to spending some time together with some prayer and reflection as a group in that way. So what are some of the things to be thinking about with respect to prayer? Well, first of all, it's important for a host to know that people don't like to be put on the spot when it comes to prayer. And if I were to, say, Elvira, would you please lead us in prayer right now? Elvira might go, oh my gosh, not prepared to do that. It really can make people feel like they've been put on the spot and feel uncomfortable. And so even if I do have a person that I've asked beforehand, like say maybe I've asked Theresa to pray for us before our meeting, she was on with me, and I asked her ahead of time. It's important to let the group know that you did that, so that they don't feel like I just put Theresa on the spot, and it creates an uncomfortable situation. So it sometimes is best to just ask, would anybody like to lead us in a prayer to close? And somebody might volunteer, and if nobody does, you can just do that yourself. After a while, groups get to where they can begin to pray with multiple people praying and sharing prayer requests and offering up prayers. And when you start to try that in a group that's not used to doing that, one of the things that I always encourage people to do as hosts is to pray simply, so that other people don't hear your prayer and go, wow, that prayer by Charlie Holt, I could never pray a prayer like that. That is so pious and so theological that I could never do that. So having a simple prayer like, thank you, God, for this group. Thank you, God, for the weather. And then the person next to you says, I could do better than that. And it actually empowers people if you are a little more humble in the way that you pray, at least to get that kind of prayer going in your group. Other thoughts or?
Well, sometimes you can just instruct your group that let's do sentence prayer, and kind of describe to them what that's about. I mean, I've found that there hardly is anyone that doesn't respond well to that, especially if you're going right around a circle and they know when it's their turn.
Yeah. How would you define sentence prayer? What would you describe that as?
Well, just praying a sentence or two.
That's
of something that's really on your heart and mind, and then it goes and just say amen, or I've been in groups before where you just squeeze the next person's hand or whatever, so that it's just a real brief prayer, but then everybody participates.
Yeah, and tell them, if you don't want to pray, that's okay. Just squeeze the person's hand next to you. They'll know that you're not going to do one.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I've seen that done.
That's what we call popcorn prayer.
Okay, what's popcorn prayer?
that's what it is. Holding hands and squeezing, or going around, and that you and this was something that's way back when we started that, and that's when you say, but you don't want to go last because then all the good stuff's gone.
Oh, so you gotta get your kernel to pop earlier.
You want to go first so that not all the good stuff's taken. That's a joke, but I like that. I've not heard it called sentence prayer. But on a more serious note, Charlie, I was telling you about what I introduced to one of my groups, which was what we call conversational prayer. And it was beautiful. It really was beautiful, because I've been with a group of ladies for 2.5 years, and the reservation to pray out loud is, with some of the individuals, is just as strong as it was 2.5 years ago. It's just there. And so at Christmas time, I said, if you'll just do this with me, just please do this with me. We'll pray with our eyes open. And I want you just to look to the person to the right of you and pray what's on your heart for that person. We've been together for 2.5 years, and we know each other. We know who's struggling in their jobs, who maybe has family issues, just whatever is on your heart. We pray for that individual next to you. And we just went around. So you only prayed for and with the person to the right of you. But your eyes are open. You don't have to be, prostrate or anything like that. You're just praying, and you're in conversation. It was just really, really meaningful. And it was a beautiful thing to hear how throughout the meetings the weeks that we've spent together, the years that we spent together, how much impact each other has had on each other's lives, and how much we really are absorbing about each of us in the group. So
that's great.
Yeah, I love that. I loved it.
So there are lots of good ideas of how to encourage, and lots of different things to try. So the key thing is, I think, to do it, and to have something, some way to engage in prayer. In the study guides that we did, there are actually written prayers that a group can pray before their meetings, which can make it give people a starting point if they're not comfortable with an extemporaneous prayer. You don't have to use those prayers, but they're just there to kind of give people a starting point and a jumping off point for prayer. Another thing that you can do, particularly if your group is large, we had some small groups that had 15 and 18 people in them, and doing a large group popcorn prayer or sentence prayer might take a long time to get all that done. And it also does become a place where just a few people typically will end up praying. So you can divide up a large group into smaller groups of 2 or 3 people together to go and spend time as prayer partners, and just share prayer requests in a smaller group. And that's often an effective strategy for larger groups. Let's see. In our study, again, there's a place in the back where people can write down in a prayer journal some of the prayer requests that were shared. And I think that's a really neat thing to do, because over the weeks of your group's meeting, you can look back on some of those prayer requests and see how the Lord answered those prayers. And so taking prayer requests, and it also is a place for a participant to write down some of those prayer requests and have that journal with them through the week, so that they can continue to pray for those things as the week goes on until they meet again. So keep track and celebrate those answered prayers. Those are real important moments, and that's really fun to see that happen. Let's see how we're doing on time. We got about 12 minutes here. I want to talk a little bit about delegating responsibility, because this is absolutely critical to group health and group dynamics. A small group has a multitude of gifts, spiritual gifts, talents, people with different levels of experience, and the Lord wants us to work together and to use those different gifts and talents and experiences and to share what we have. So it's so important to as soon as possible to set the tone in a new group that we're going to share the responsibilities of this group. No one person is going to do everything. So there are a lot of different things that we can share, like the administration of the group. Maybe there's some computer work that needs to be done, and some people are really excited about emailing and using church databases and that kind of thing, and they like to log into the church database and record attendance, or whatever the administrative components of the group are. Somebody might be really excited to do that part. Others are very gifted at leading the discussions, and they feel comfortable doing that and excited about it. Some people are really the prayer warriors, and so the prayer piece might be their thing, where they want to keep track of those prayer requests and make sure that those are communicated, or leading the group in some special prayer. You can rotate where the home is. It could be hosted at somebody else's house the next week, and so switching host homes is not a bad thing to do. And sharing in the burden of making snacks and bringing refreshments. It's always good to take turns doing that part. And also, we had a guy in our group that could play the guitar, so he brought music to our group, and we would finish our group with a praise song. So there are lots of different gifts, and there's more than that list there, but that just gives some ideas of how to engage all the people in the group. And one of the things that we, again, put in our curriculum, the Crucified Life Study, is a little calendar in the back that you can use as a small group to organize these things if you want to. You don't have to use that. A simple piece of paper works fine too, but that is there as a help or a tool. Thoughts about this? I mean, what's been y'all's experience in encouraging or spreading the load?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, to me, one of the things I also am mindful of as a pastor is I want to see people raised up, not just as new Christians, but also to become Christian leaders. Mm-hmm. And so when we give people an opportunity to use their different gifts, you never know how somebody that you invited into your home, and we actually had this happen where a couple that we invited to come into our home, the next thing you know, they are hosting our group at their house. One of the man in the group or in the couple facilitated the discussion, and it was a real moment of really testing that gift, and it proved to him and to his wife that he was good at it. That after our group was finished, they started another small group in their home. And it was in the context of our group that they tested those gifts. They were encouraged and affirmed by the members of our group, and then they had the confidence to then go out and recruit a new small group. And to me, that's how that ACT church that you mentioned earlier. That's how it worked. You know, people had a safe place to test their gifts, and then it multiplied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a host, there's nothing more rewarding on a personal level than to have someone that's been a part of your group just show a heart for either serving in another capacity or opening up their home. Like that's a success. It's just an amazing thing. That's where, you know, hosting group after group, that's how you get your reward, if you will. Ultimately, it's, you know, for the glory of God, but it is important to share the responsibility, just giving each individual person an opportunity to plug in where they're uniquely able to do so.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And it also prevents us from burning any one person out too, which can so often happen, especially if you're the one that started the group. You're doing all these different things, and you can just get real burned out, and you feel like everybody's just taking from you, and you're not receiving anything. That's not fair to do to somebody. So, got to share. And the other, you know, thinking about Elvira's situation, even if you only started your small group, if you had a group of people that you were thoughtful about, that group could be the seed of other groups starting, where they all got the experience doing it, and then you know, you could encourage them and say, you know, we're gonna now multiply this, and
That's right.
That could be a strategy that you might want to take.
That's right. You really inspired me. I think this is what I'm going to do.
Awesome.
One of the small groups that David and I belong to includes a shared meal. And that's exactly the way we handle it. We rotate from house to house, and the host home makes the meat dish, if you will, and then everybody else brings a side dish. And then as we move to the next house, then they take the lead in that. And pretty much the same thing happens in prayer then. The host home leads in the prayer, and everybody else joins in. So it's a real way to just naturally spread the responsibility around.
Absolutely. And one of the things you brought up doing a shared meal. I think it's awesome when groups get to that level, but oftentimes that's not a great place to start with a brand new group, is with having a meal together. Particularly with a study like the Crucified Life, where it's pretty much takes about an hour and a half, and some groups take as much as 2 hours to work through the material. You can do it in an hour, but it'll feel kind of rushed. And if you add a meal to that, it can become a really long night and a pretty heavy evening. And if that's not what people were expecting, it can become a hindrance to the group sticking together. But the other piece is that the meal can burn out the brand new host too. If they have the expectation that they have to prepare a meal in order to have a small group, then sometimes that can get a little overwhelming over time. So I always encourage new hosts to maybe do a meal together as a group, as a celebration, or set that up, down the road, and try that out later. But get the group established first, and then when you go to do that meal, you're ready for it. And we actually shared, when we started our brand new Crucified Life group, we didn't have a meal together until the last session was when we did a meal together. And that seemed to work well. But I will tell you that once we did share that meal together, the positive side of that and the experience of that really loosened everybody up. And then when we went to do the Resurrected Life, which is the second one in this series, our group went exponentially deeper. So there is a real power in sharing a meal together, and it's a very important thing to just be thoughtful about and how you apply that piece.
Now, sometimes 2 hours of intense discussion is really over the top for some people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't put this in the slide, but I encourage people to set it at an hour and a half and make sure you end on time, so that people know that it'll start and end on time, and you create that expectation. And there is something called a group covenant, where at the beginning of your group, when you're first meeting, it's a good practice to just go ahead and set those expectations, and everybody agrees that we're going to meet for an hour and a half. This is where we're going to meet. This is the time that we're going to meet. This is, are we having a meal? Are we not having a meal? Are we having snacks? What? And these kind of details get sort of ironed out as the nuts and bolts at the beginning. And it just clarifies those kind of expectations and makes a group a lot more healthy as it goes on. Good points. Great.
Yeah, the covenant is an awesome idea. I use it, but I do want to tell you that when I took my group through the crucified life, we always went over because there was so much good discussion. So the fact that Charlie, that you have the asterisk, the starred questions. Mm-hmm. We actually, as we went through it, we had to really hone in on those starred questions because we were the ones that were like, we hadn't gotten through all the questions. The dialogue was so good. So so that's something that we could have mentioned a couple slides ago, but they're just relevant to the crucified life. Those starred questions are the ones that we ended up focusing on to help with the time because we always went over.
Yeah. And it's funny when we were putting together the curriculum and we people have said they like having the number of questions because it gives options and choices for people to pick and choose which one might be relevant to their discussion. And others who are more legalistic, I guess, want to make sure they cover every single point and if that's the mentality, it's going to be hard. You have to be able to be flexible as the group's going on, and make sure that you're attentive to the pace of a discussion. But that it just takes practice. People will get there. We have it's 3:00. I did want to mention childcare being the most challenging thing for small groups. What I'll do is I'll put a handout on the website that has these points on it about options for what people to do for childcare. Some churches provide a childcare allowance for groups that have young children to help offset the cost. Our church provides childcare at the church on Wednesday night, so we do have some groups that meet on campus and take advantage of the childcare. But some other options are the families take care of their own arrangements, or groups contribute to a common babysitter. There's lots of ways to solve that problem, but that's one of the most difficult things. We didn't talk about what to do about the difficult people. We call them extra grace required. But on our training videos with the Christian Life Trilogy, there is some discussion about that, how to handle a challenging person. And in the materials themselves, in that leadership lifters and on-the-job training, there you'll find some discussion about what you could do to encourage each other and to really build up actually those people that may be a little prickly or have needs. So,
that's right.
Any other questions before we break? I want to be careful about your time. I try to end at 3.
Very much. This was very helpful.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charlie.
Yeah, there are more. We've recorded all of our webinars. They're on the ChristianLifeTrilogy.com website. Those are free for you to use if you'd like. If you want to get ideas, that all of that's out there. And this one is recorded and will be on that website. So feel free to use it. And in the Christian Life Training DVD, there's actually a host training session in there, and you may want to take a look at that too, as a way to get some other thoughts or ideas about training hosts. So.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Any other?
Let me know. I just want to extend my support to you. So let me know if there's anything that I can do as well.
Yeah, if you call the phone number on the Christian Life Trilogy website, you get Theresa. So
Thank you, everybody.
Oh, okay. All righty.
So
Thank
call
you.
me.
Okay. Bye-bye.
God bless. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, my name's Charlie Holt, and I'm the pastor of St. Peter's Church and the author of the Christian Life Trilogy. Over the years, I've had a hunger to see solid small group materials developed in and around the core faith of our church, found in the gospel of Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that He was buried, and that He was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures." The Christian Life Trilogy seeks to focus on the things of first importance: the crucified life, the resurrected life, and the Spirit-filled life. To explore what it means to walk the way of the cross, to be raised with Christ in newness of life, and to be filled with all the fullness of the Spirit of God. As a pastor, every year I'm asking myself, what am I going to do for Lent this year? Listen to the impact the Crucified Life materials have had on those who participated during Lent.
I think very often you look at the empty cross, you look at just the season of Lent, here we go, another year. This gave people an opportunity to go deeper and to really find out, what does this mean? How does this apply to my life? What does this mean for my depth of spirituality?
To think of what Jesus was going through, it just made the Easter experience, the entire Easter experience, the most profound one I've ever had.
The average Christian, when he thinks about the last 7 phrases that Christ said on the cross, may take them at face value. But when we find out from this session on the crucified life, the meaning behind those words and how it applies to us, it definitely matures you as a Christian in a very strong way. I look at things totally different than I did before.
I think the crucified life really went to a place in people's lives where they're longing, but maybe don't even know they need. I've heard over and over again how God's touched people's lives and brought them to a deeper level of faith and intimacy with Christ through this Crucified Life series, and how our church as a community went through it together.
What you have just heard is the transformational power of the first study in the trilogy, The Crucified Life, 7 Words from the Cross. The entire Christian Life Trilogy is a 20-week journey into the heart of the gospel and the heart of the Christian life. These 3 studies are not only deeply theological in their intent and purpose, but also deeply practical, as they call us to be transformed into the image and likeness of God through His Son, Jesus Christ.
Within just a couple of weeks, people were really sharing some of their biggest challenges, some of the toughest things that they're going through, and then watching other people in my group literally just wrap their arms around them, pray for them, and get involved in their lives. And that stuck and still sticks to this day. So that was, I think, what we needed, and that's what God did through the material.
God is calling the church back to His heart, and you're invited to be a part of that by participating in the Christian Life Trilogy church-wide campaign. I hope this resource will bring tremendous renewal to the church, your congregation, and to you personally. My prayer is that the Lord will bring all of our hearts back to the things of first importance as we walk the way of the crucified life, the resurrected life, and the Spirit-filled life.